Hey everyone, welcome back to the Edgewater Avenue YouTube channel. I'm Katie, and today I'm going to show you how to use an elastic foot for swimwear. So first, what is an elastic foot? An elastic foot is a specialty sewing foot that is intended to sew elastic in a variety of ways. Specialty sewing feet are really great tools because generally they're going to make that specific task that you're doing a lot easier. And in this case, it makes sewing elastic easier. Elastic is tricky enough as it is, and I'm always seeing sewing questions specifically about elastic. And my answer to a lot of these elastic related questions is to try an elastic foot. It's a great tool because it takes a lot of the human error out of the equation, which you may or may not realize you are causing. And an elastic foot can be used for a variety of functions, but in this video, I'm going to focus just on using it for swimwear. So let's go over just the different parts of the elastic foot. Here's what the foot looks like up close. Yours might look different, but the components and functions are the same. There's two main parts: the tension knob and the feeding mechanism. You twist the tension knob to adjust the tension. The feeding mechanism has this little rolly thing inside, which helps the elastic feed through, and it also prevents the elastic from going back out the other way. And that's because it has this texture on it, so it prevents any sort of slippage. Additionally, there's a plate attached to the feeding mechanism, and you can adjust this plate based on what size elastic you're using. So next, I'm going to show you how I feed elastic into the foot. So to feed the elastic inside, you need to lift up the little mechanism in the front here. And once you lift that up, you can stick the elastic in through and then down. Then pull it through and it's ready to go. And if you need to change the size of elastic that you're using, you're also going to adjust the plate on the foot. I'm using 1/4 inch elastic, and so I just keep it at 1/4 inch. But if I were moving to something larger, then I would use that plate and I would adjust it to make sure it's the right size. Now let's move on to actually using the sewing foot. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is switch out the foot. So I have my regular foot on here and I'm going to put on the elastic foot. And every machine is different. Mine has a little drop at the back of the foot. You're going to slide the other one out, put that to the side, and you're going to put in your elastic foot, and you want the feeding mechanism to be facing you. So put that in, click it in. There we go. So you might have a preference on what you like to feed in first. I find that it's easier to put the elastic in first and then do the fabric, but if you decide to do the fabric first, then you can make that decision. So I'm gonna grab my elastic here. And like I demonstrated earlier, I'm gonna open it up here, stick the elastic in, and this time I'm gonna grab it and pull it through. So you can start the elastic if you want to save it and start it at the actual needle, but what I've found is if you pull the elastic all the way through, it's a lot easier to get started onto a seam because then the machine actually has something feeding into it. So then you're going to lift up the foot. Here we can do this, and we're going to feed the fabric in. And this part can be a little bit tricky, but with enough practice, you will get the hang of it. Make sure everything is lined up, and then we can lower the presser foot. So before I actually start sewing, I'm just going to check my tension. How much tension you'll want is determined by what you're doing. For pretty much 99% of what I do, I have the loosest possible tension. And that's because I don't want any sort of like scrunching or bunching or any of that. I want my seams to lay flat. And one other thing to check before you start is that your elastic is in a good position so it can feed evenly. I have a box of elastic next to me, and I just take a few feet out at a time, put them in my lap, make sure there's no tangles or anything, and then I just let the elastic feed evenly. If you have knots or if you have any sort of tension, that's going to affect your sewing. And so now we can sew. I still like to be really active in the process, and for me that means two things. One, monitoring this front end and making sure that my fabric is feeding in and it's aligned. And then two, having some sort of action in the back, making sure that it's all the way through and just kind of guiding the piece through the machine. So as you can see, it is absolutely perfect. No tension, no nothing. But because things can't just be simple, you're probably going to run into some issues with an elastic foot at some point. So the main problem that I had when I first started using the elastic foot was alignment. I was so focused on what the elastic was doing, it would like kind of veer off to the left a little bit, that I wasn't really paying much attention to the way that my fabric was feeding in. And so what would happen is my fabric would be too far from the needles, and so I wouldn't actually sew through my fabric. I'd just have like just sewn elastic and, the fabric barely attached. So alignment, I'd say, was the biggest issue that I had. To solve the alignment problem, I'm a firm believer of practice makes perfect. However, there are some tips that you can use in the meantime. The best tip is not worrying about what the elastic is doing. Instead, focus your efforts on where the fabric is going. Trust your elastic foot to do the job that it's supposed to do, and then that way you can make sure that everything is aligned. But again, practice makes perfect. When I first got my elastic foot, I didn't really go near it. I tried it a couple times and just couldn't get the hang of it. And it wasn't until I really committed to practicing and using it that I really got the hang of it. And now my elastic application is perfect every single time. So don't get discouraged if you're starting out and you hate it. Like, I honestly think that if you practice enough, you can overcome those issues. You're probably also going to come across tension problems. Now my Baby Lock Evolution, it has automatic tension, and so I don't really have to mess with the tension at all. When I switch from fabric to elastic, it just handles it well. But I know that's not the case with everyone's machines. I know that there's a lot of very fussy machines out there. So I know that on many machines, you're gonna need to change your tension when you're sewing just fabric versus fabric and elastic. So be prepared to have to experiment with the tension. And if you are having tension related issues, I'm going to link a blog post in the description that will go over how to diagnose and then solve your tension problems. So the last problem/solution I wanted to talk about is your needles. If your machine is doing weird things like skipping stitches, then there's a good chance that replacing your needles is going to help. So make sure that you have fresh needles and that they're the right type. I use ballpoint needles in my machine, and the general rule of thumb is to replace your needles after 24 hours of work on the machine. To be honest, I don't do that. I change my needles if I start having problems. If I don't start having problems, then I just leave them. So replace your needles, and that might be the source of a lot of your issues. I just buy a lot of needles at once, and I got a 25 pack on Amazon for $15. And I'll have that linked in the description for the exact needles that I use. So moving on, where do you buy an elastic foot? So for one thing, sewing feet are not universal. What this means is that you're gonna need to get an elastic foot that is compatible with your specific machine. I have a Baby Lock Evolution, and my elastic foot is made by Baby Lock. I got mine originally off of eBay. I'll put the links in the description if you also have a Baby Lock Evolution or a compatible Baby Lock and you want to use the elastic foot that I'm using. For any machine, it's a good idea to start on Google and search elastic foot and the name of your machine. So Brother 1034D elastic foot. And this should bring up websites that carry something compatible, but you can also try Amazon and eBay. And I can't stress this enough. Sometimes you think that something is compatible, maybe they list it like it would be compatible, but it ends up not being. So really do your research, but also I'd recommend buying from a store that has a good return policy, because there might be just that tiny little chance that it's not going to work for your machine, and if they don't let you return it, then it's going to be useless. So it's worth buying from a place that you can return. Another option to find an elastic foot is if you have like a local sewing shop, sometimes they'll carry that type of thing. And if they don't carry it, they might be able to order it for you. And that wraps up this video. My overall thoughts on the elastic foot is that it's well worth trying. It might be a struggle at first, but once you get enough practice, you'll really get the hang of it, and your sewing just in general will be so much better and it'll be so much more efficient. It's worth putting in the effort to be able to have perfect elastic application every single time. So if you're not already, go and follow at EdgewaterAv on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And be sure to check out the Facebook group where we have over 3,000 members who are swimwear sewers just like you. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you again soon.